I have had the good fortune to spend the last few weeks on vacation. For some reason, Nikki told me I needed it. Well, not technically the last few weeks, because I've actually been back at work the past 2. But before that, I did spend a couple of weeks in the frozen wastelands of our northern cousins. Yeah. You come back and you have to deal with the reality of climate change. And yeah, maybe it isn't really a frozen wasteland just because they have universal healthcare, sausage rolls, penguin bars and crunchies. It's not like I'm bitter or anything. Anyhow, I'm back with some tips for all y'all if you're thinking of taking your EV across into another country. So if you're packing your bags for a trip, join me so you don't make some of the mistakes that I have made in the past. I've spent a fair amount of time driving abroad. Before I lived in the US, I nearly killed myself in a very confusing set of roadworks in Toronto, or Toronto as people said I should say it, where I ended up trapped in a coned-off section with a tram heading towards me. Sometimes I think I can still hear the trams coming for me still. But there are some things that aren't quite so joined up when you're travelling abroad in an EV. I'm no stranger to driving EVs in countries other than the one I call home. Every time I'm back in the UK, it's an exciting experience because you're never quite sure what's changed. And this summer, we took our Kia Niro EV on an extended jaunt into the colonies.
Hello? Sweetie, darling, we don't call them that anymore. They're not the colonies. They get upset if we use that. Oh dear. Where were you brung up?
Yeah, suppose not. And we're going to start with some tips and tricks for before you get going. And because our comment section is just going to be filled with shouty bobs saying, you wouldn't have to do that in a gas car. No, that's true. I'd just look at where the gas stations were and make sure that they were actually open because I might need them at an unusual time. Because I always remember being in a remote village on one of our camping trips and discovering that the local garage wasn't anywhere near 24 hours unless you meant 24 hours spread over the next month. And we needed petroleum distillate. And filling up with gasoline isn't something you work around by getting your bard to persuade the local hostelry to let you plug in. Anyway, allons-y! When it comes to travelling abroad, personally, I like to make sure that I can use as many charging stations as possible. While in Europe, the charging standard is settled, so this bit at least is a non-issue. In North America, that situation is still somewhat more in flux. And that means that if you're going to take a vehicle far from home, it may well be worth picking up an adapter or two. For Tesla owners, having a CHAdeMO or CCS charging adapter could be a lifesaver. We stayed on Vancouver Island, and while there are 3 supercharger locations and a 4th coming soon, they're all on the southern half of the island, which is probably why the 50 kilowatt chargers in Campbell River seem to spend a lot of time with Teslas parked at them. And when they start to appear on the market, NACS to CCS adapters will be really handy for those of us who like making long distance drives in our CCS EVs, assuming generic ones ever become a thing. But it's not just rapid charging. Both what were once called Tesla destination chargers and level 2 J1772 chargers abound at hostelries and small businesses, and having an adapter to make sure you can use either of them is definitely something that's very handy to have around. While most hotels with a Tesla destination charger did, at least at one point, have a J1772 adapter, for us J1772 proles, after so many years and changes of staff, it's a non-zero possibility that no one will know where the adapter is. In a lot of countries, And frankly, on a lot of charging stations, contactless payment is de rigueur for payment. If your bank, credit union, building society, or utopian future society offers it, then contactless payment is super handy, because charging station card readers often have taken a bit of a beating. Not only do they live outside in the heat, the snow, the dust, and the rain, but alongside the screens, and yes, Shouty Bob, I'm fully aware Tesla superchargers don't have screens, the credit card reader often seems to bear the brunt of vandalism. And while the chip and pin reader might be as functional as the USS Reliant, sometimes contactless payment will do the trick to get things started. For users of Android and iOS smartphones, if your box of cash buried at your cabin in the woods isn't able to perform contactless payment, most phones can function as contactless payment devices. Our own banking institution doesn't offer contactless cards yet. Yes, I know. But my phone fulfills that role for me, and it does a pretty good job. It certainly helped while we were away. And I know this could be a teaching my grandmother to suck eggs moment, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Tell your preferred banking institution that you're going to be travelling to wherever you're going to be travelling. While a few dollars here and there on holiday souvenirs might not trigger your fraud alert, charging up at a random charging station owned by a company several hundred or 1,000 kilometers away from where you live could cause some alarm bells to ring. We are gradually, oh so gradually, moving towards a situation where you don't need an entire separate phone just filled with charging station apps to access all the networks you want to use. But it's still handy to have a quick look at a map and see what networks are in the area you're going to. If you can, it's worth downloading these apps ahead of time, doing all the nonsense of creating accounts and logins while you're comfy on your sofa. While many charging station providers allow anyone to charge and don't require an app, maybe just offering preferential rates to folks who do have an app or an account, for example, BC Hydro and PSE Up and Go, to name two fairly local utility-run networks, both need you to have an app to start your charging session. Without it, you're stuck calling the support line or having the joy of trying to download the app and configure it while you're waiting, which is, and I've tried this, no fun. A couple of trips back, I went to the UK and our data plan didn't start until the next day. We were trying to download the app we required for one particularly miserable 50 kilowatt charger in a shopping precinct in Bristol, and it took a chunk out of the day and pushed us from being early to see friends to being late, and ended in failure anyway because the app, it turned out once I'd got it, couldn't cope with our sluggish data connection. Oh, and if you're wondering, because I was, your Electrify America account, if you have one, does not connect to Electrify Canada. They don't share that information, so then you get to use their excellent and reliable card readers on their definitely reliable chargers. Back when I started driving EVs, you couldn't make a long distance trip without a veritable cornucopia of RFID cards. Believe me, I had a whole separate wallet that lived in our iMeave that was just stuffed like a Dentrassi Hagra biscuit with cards for charging networks. That's thankfully gone by the wayside, and locally I don't have any RFID cards. However, there are still networks that like to party like it's 1999 and still issue RFID cards. And I did run into them back in the UK, and some of the networks I signed up for in Canada also offered the option. Thankfully, for our trip, none of them were necessary, but it's worth having a quick butcher's at where you're planning to be, and make sure that if any one of those charging stops that you would like to use does prefer an RFID card, you can get one mailed to you ahead of time. Although that may require a call to customer service, because historically charging networks that use RFID cards have been a bit xenophobic, unaware of countries other than their own. Anyhow, persuading them to send them abroad can sometimes be tricky, but it's always worth a shot. So these are some general travel things that are handy to think about, whether you're driving an EV or not. But particularly handy if you're in an EV. And also, I know, more egg sucking, but it's generally worth setting up a decent data plan for your phone, doubly so if you expect to use any chargers that require an app for authentication. Some apps will barely work without a solid internet connection. Believe me, like I said, I tried the free 2G included with our plan when we visited the UK a couple of trips back, and several other charging company apps just wouldn't work at all either. So that's always useful. And finally, make sure you know how to switch your digital dashboard into kilometers or miles per hour. I was foolishly under the impression that the Nero EV did it automatically, since I was vaguely aware that the setting for kilometers and miles was in the navigation settings. I was wrong, and we had to complete a quick internet search to find out how to change it when we crossed into a country that uses sensible measurements, because it is not immediately obvious, at least to me, and converting to kilometers in my head isn't something that I can do on the fly while driving. So you've flown across, you've landed, and you've picked up your shiny rental EV, or, you've driven into another country in your own car. You are in insert destination country here. What else might be handy to know? Well, bear in mind that some remote functions, if you've taken your own vehicle, may or may not work. Our Nero EV declined to connect to Canadian cell providers, and so remote climate, remote battery state of charge, and remote lock-unlock, in fact all the remote functions, did not work. For me, that wasn't a huge issue, but be aware that it may be something that isn't available. Having talked with folks on our Discord chat room and a quick scan of various forums, it definitely seems like this is improving with cars with more advanced telemetry than our 29 Nero. That said, while our Nero doesn't have this function, I do know that several automakers have limits on how many times phone as a key or face unlock or those similar functions will work when the vehicle doesn't have a live internet connection. Which, if you're reliant on that out in the wilds and you don't have a key with you, could become an issue. And one other thing that's kind of important, if, like me, you like staying out in the boonies, bear in mind that even if you have a data plan, you may or may not have a connection. And this is true whether you're abroad or somewhere remote in your own country. It turns out that most apps either won't load, hat tip to Tesla's app here, I just got bored waiting for it, or they won't show you any actual charging stations. Hat tip there to PlugShare. If they can't get an internet connection, they often don't maintain a backup list of chargers if they don't have that live data connection, and then you're just out of luck. So if you're going out into the wilds and you have some chargers that you think might be ones you want to use, go ahead and mark them on a map, make a note, or take a screenshot of the locations before you find yourself out in the wilds and unable to remember if, say, for example, the charger in Gold River is a rapid charger or if it's a level 2. It's a rapid charger, by the way. Frustratingly, the Nero's own point of interest maps, i.e. charger maps, also didn't work properly without a cell phone signal. And while if you asked it specifically, where is a charger near me, it would give you an option, it didn't show them on the large-scale map to allow you to do just some route and trip planning. That, combined with the apps not working, did make planning some trips a little trickier, although funnily enough, when we went for a trek up a logging road to visit some caves, the only other non-4x4 that we saw was another Nero EV. So that's my top tips for a peaceful, smooth e-vacation. Do you have any suggestions for a charged up journey? Let us know. And on that note, we're done with today's video. If you liked it, you know what to do, and feel free to let us know your thoughts in our Discord chat room by reaching out to us on Mastodon, or if you're a Patreon supporter, leaving a comment on our Patreon page. You can also leave comments down in the comment section. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links below to regularly support us with a YouTube membership or Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and our swag store, as well as that aforementioned Mastodon server. Scrolling by, on my right, is our amazing list of charged up supporters. And shout outs go to our self-driving tier supporters, Mike Weeder, Denny Hyde, Linda Irish, Lance Charles, Mark Eggleton, Cyprian Laplace, John Trammell, Alan Tupper, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Sean Tucker, Pedro Mura Pinheiro, Kyle Hodgson, Tony Moss, Brophy Wolf, Kyle Fox, Hay Esker, Tesla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C, Stephen Fremgen, Stephen Williams, Regine Fellows, Chris Ascenta, and Jim Burness. And a final out of this world thank you to our top tier supporters: John L. Henderson, Clay Witt, CPU Freak 101, John Lyons, Kevin Burrowbridge, Andrew Glenn, David Kitchen, Joe Bresney, Nigel S, Matthew Drobnak, Eric Knack, Paul Conway, Stephen O'Donoghue, JP Fagerback, Reggie Watts, Marcel Ward, Robert Flannery, Aaron Han, Rory Litwin, Ellery Hensley, Will Graham, and Ian. Don't forget, we make videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday over on the main channel, plus Sunday on Take 2. And with that, I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you soon, and as always, keep evolving.